Hey, Bible lovers, I'm Tim Nichols, and I'm here to bring you a very special type of Nicholsworth. As you know, I have been in love with the BSB ever since I read it all the way through. I love that middle of the road translation style where you go for literal, but yet you go for understandability. The note system is right up there, in my opinion, with the New King James Version, using all the manuscripts and resources right there. I love the legend in the front of the Bible that gives you a breakdown of each manuscript system that you use. To me, it is the perfect companion translation to the New King James Version. And on here today, I have Dr. Gary Hill and John Isset from BibleHub, who have a big hand in the BSB. So just introduce yourselves really quick. We'll go ahead and start with Dr. Hill, and then we'll move on to John. So introduce yourselves.
Yeah, this is Gary Hill over here, and I did a study Bible with the Moody Bible Institute back in '87, devoted to original languages with Gleason Archer. And Gleason Archer and his associates were able to come alongside and be of assistance in the preparation of the Berean Standard Bible. It's really glad to be here participating.
And I'm John Isset. We started BibleHub originally was Bible.cc, became Biblos.com, and finally, and once and for all, is BibleHub. Actually, 21 years ago was when we started. At that point, you were searching for Bible verses on Google, and even Google was pretty new at that point. So you weren't getting all of the great results that you do now. And so really the intention of BibleHub was originally just to get good results into the search engines, good Bible results. Started with 8 public domain versions, and then eventually moved on and got permissions for the others. And a lot of that process was also what showed the need for a solid public domain version for people to really start out with. I've always been grateful for World English Bible, which was the one kind of modern public domain version that we were able to start with. Big reason behind the translation is we want to be able to have whoever does the next BibleHub or whatever it may be, and there's so many good versions of software and so many tools. We want to just make there be no barrier to entry on that.
Yeah, and so what started off as a really nice and useful website eventually became an in-print Bible. And it started off as the Berean Study Bible. I actually have one of the original ones right here, the Berean Study Bible. And I remember thinking, like a lot of other people, that this was a study Bible. And when I got it and realized it was a standard Bible, now I tell you what, this is not necessarily a study Bible with commentary, but it is definitely a study Bible when it comes to the study note system. You are going to hear me bring this up a lot because this just really has an unrivaled note system. I love how it's broken down from each manuscript group, and just really excellent work on the note system. This is probably the greatest thing I appreciate about this Bible, even above and beyond the translation itself, which I have read all the way through and enjoyed thoroughly. But the note system, because I actually am one of those that I read the textual footnotes when I read a translation. So I really was able to take a lot in from this. And I also appreciate WEB. I've read that before and read the footnotes for that. That's a wild experience, getting the Textus Receptus in the footnotes along with the critical text instead of the majority. So that was wild reading from a majority.
While you're on extra features, that when you go to BibleHub, for example, Berean Standard Bible is carefully linked at every word with a strong numbering system that takes them to 3 million pages of adjunct material. I mean, all kinds of the maps and gazetteer and the commentaries, the encyclopedias, dictionaries, Hebrew and Greek helps. It is thoroughly mapped and easy to go back and forth and toggle onto. So it's really kind of a one-stop shop, interactive digital Bible as well, you know?
Yeah. And the website, that's how I was introduced to BibleHub. I had no idea that the Berean Standard Bible or the Berean Study Bible at the time was even connected to BibleHub. But that is a next level resource with the Greek and the Hebrew.
Yes.
And just love it. And anyhow, let's go ahead and talk about this update, because I have to admit, when I was sent the 3rd edition and I started looking through it, I was like, whoa, this is a pretty sizable update. So tell us about the update. Tell us the heart behind the update, and tell us why you felt the update was necessary. And do we have at least somewhat of a stable text now?
So I guess I should take that. When we went to straight public domain, and originally the Berean was a very open licensing, didn't even really have to have it approved. You just had to fill out the web form and you were licensed, maintained the copyright. Reason being the concern of, are people going to change the words? Are people going to have that ability? And so we were just a little bit careful at the beginning. The more that we opened it up, there were people that came to us and said, if it didn't have this restriction, we would just feel a lot better. We've seen other versions that have, adjusted their rights one way or the other. We really didn't want anyone after us to even have that option. And so we felt like the public domain was the way to go and just make it permanent, like King James is, maybe except in Great Britain, but nobody has control over that, and it is the word of God. I mean, there really should not be someone that feels like they own that. And so it's kind of just a blessing and an honor to be able to, and a major responsibility to be able to even do a translation. We really felt like that had to be fully released and given back. Along with that was even the addition of AI, and you would ask ChatGPT to put something for you, and often it would not give you a full chapter because of copyright restrictions. Even as that tool grew, we wanted to even not restrict that, and if people wanted to quote a whole chapter, a whole book, then we wanted to leave that ability there. When we switched to public domain was probably where the greatest amount of interest came in. Two of the groups that really came to us, because this was also what they do, is resources translating. One was Unfolding Word, also Bible Aquifer. And so those groups came to us, were nice enough to kind of ask for permission to use the translation. But since they do a lot of translation work themselves, they did have some suggestions. The request from Unfolding Word was that they would put a full committee together and actually do a full evaluation of the whole text. So that is actually what they did for us. Made a couple, ended up to be a couple thousand recommendations. We stuck to the, especially to the initial core of our translation philosophies, the capitalized deity, the pronouns had to be correct for gender as they are in the Greek or Hebrew. We stuck to that basically absolutely. Where there were suggestions that we felt were actual improvements, then it seemed like it was the right time to do that and kind of rip the Band-Aid off, just do that full update. And I would say, hopefully, once and for all. It's hard to say, I think we've seen people promise stable text and then go back on it. What is a stable text? But I would say that from now on, at this point, our committee has moved on to the literal version and the interlinear. Even just with what the committee's able to do, we really do not want to do any more major updating. And so, I would say if there's a couple of grammatical issues that might need corrected, we're still going to do those. We want it to be, the best presentation that we're able to do of God's word. As far as this level of an update, we're not going to do again.
Okay.
I should also summarize what that update was. So when we counted the textual changes, most of them very minor, 913. In addition to that, 155 punctuation only, basically your comma, semicolon, whatever small differences there. And when you weigh it with the full Bible, that's out of 1,189 chapters. So less than one per chapter. When you look at the list, it does look scary. Like, honestly, you look at that list and it's like, what did they do? It is a long list. What I really noticed, because we went actually last, I think, September, so about a year ago, was when that went online. We had a real positive reception of the changes. I don't even remember anyone that said, "Why did you change this?" And it seemed like until that went into print, which was actually earlier this year, then that's where people really said, "Oh," and obviously the difference between the digital that is a lot more fluid, the print, if you bought a Bible already and then feel like, well, now it's not the current version, that's a definite frustration that I think a lot of us have had with many translations. And
Right.
so very understood. We kind of looked at it when we looked at the recommendations that we had received. And I should also say, as we take recommendations from the general public, like those were also all weighed in. And so at this point, those kind of have stopped. But especially when it went to public domain, there seemed to be so much more interest. So we just felt like one final update. I compare it to what NIV did between 1973 and 1984, and theirs was comparable, not quite as many. I think it was maybe 600 or 700. So they had a comparable adjustment, and it's kind of the process of a new translation is that you're going to have feedback, you're going to have adjustments to make, and if you want to make it the best translation that you can, if you're looking at two versions and one recommendation is better, you're going to want to do that. And so that's really what NIV did, even between 73 and 84. Whatever, people may be able to take the current BSB, they may want to do another version. And of course, with public domain, derivatives are not even banned. That was part of the concern with the copyright. As far as the committee, as far as what we're presenting as Berean Standard Bible, is what I would call a stable text at this point. And if there is another quote, a version of it, it's not going to be called Berean Standard Bible. So just like when NIV went to 2011, I think it's very similar situation. Is it that 84, which I grew up memorizing, that's what we want to keep as stable and as permanent. And with it being public domain, there's no one that can take it away.
So the difference between public domain and non-copyrighted, I think that's something that's important because this is a copyrighted translation, correct?
It is not anymore. It's released to public domain, CC0.
Okay, so
And
does that mean that anyone can make alterations to it?
What we have stated in our permission, well, it's so-called permission statement at this point, but released to public domain, we request that anybody that uses the text would not change any wording if they're presenting it as Berean.
Okay, so they'd have to call it something else.
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Or it would be fair if they stated what their process was. I mean, that would be a fair thing to do, but to not call it Berean, and I think honestly it would only discredit oneself to do that. Just like if BibleHub were going to present the ESV and have our own version of it, no one would want to use the site because they wouldn't trust it. And so
right.
I think you just have to be honest about it. And really our biggest hope is that these bigger publishers will pick it up, just like so many people have picked up King James, and they just don't have any barriers to entry. They don't have any concerns or restrictions or like a limit of it's not going to be like in 5 years they have to renew their contract. And so we wanted to give people that full confidence that they can print this and develop really, and it's not as much as developing derivatives of the text, but developing tools around it. And so they can do that. We're not restricting anything. It's unlimited. And so that's our prayer, is really that it's going to grow and the people with the resources to do that level of printing and that level of distribution. Our prayer is that it actually gets to those people and gets accomplished that way.
Yeah. Well, I think Humble Lamb picking it up is going to be a big deal. And you all publish a very nice edition as it is. So it's no slouch, the edition you all put out. So that I think that's something to really, I don't know if proud is the right word, but something that it really shows the spirit of excellence in the layout and the binding style. Even the hardbacks are very nice.
Well, that's appreciated. That's definitely, we didn't want to make any compromises with that. It is a challenge. There's only maybe 2 or 3 major presses that even do Bible publishing in the US. And it's just such a specialized thing that it's even to get yourself on the list and on their, to get your job through, and especially being a smaller publisher, that's a challenge. Our hope is that that we'll have additional groups pick it up. We're really excited that Whitaker has picked it up. They're, now they're working on their version of it. By version, I mean they're using the BSB text, but they are going to have, I think it's going to be somewhat of a verse by verse format. So
Okay.
If you look at their KJVER, their format is real nice, and they've done a good job with the notes. So that's one that we're really excited about. Can't wait till we hear about more of them.
So Dr. Hill, you were on the translation committee. Is that correct?
Yes, and on behalf of the translation committee, I'd just like to make a couple remarks from an academic point of view. There's a saying in seminary that's legitimate. There is no such thing as final knowledge or final translation. And it's in the very nature of a divinely inspired text, where terms that have what's called a semantic range, like the Greek term parakaleo, whether you exhort or you encourage and so forth, admonish. The changes that we were talking about in the BSB are not a matter of errors within the semantic range that's legitimate, the different words that can be chosen, but rather an increasingly sensitive view to communication. Which one, as our own language changes a bit as we go along, how do you best communicate? But it wasn't so much that there was something outside of legitimate choices on those changes that went from error to correction, as much as modifications within the present communication, postmodern audience that we have. And so I've been very glad to be part of things. And I cannot tell you how much care was given, how many hours were given to make sure that any of those choices that were made, those changes, were already within the range of what essentially literal translations were consistent with. So I just thought I would drop that background in.
It's also super important because that is one of the arguments that the King James only movement will make. Well, if your text needs to be updated, then it wasn't perfect to begin with. And this isn't talking about perfection. This is talking about the growth and evolution, which is probably a controversial term by itself with the King James only crowd of the English language. And as it changes, I don't love translation updates. I'm not opposed to them, but one of the reasons that I really love the New King James is because it is a stable text. And at this point, in 1984, if they were to monkey with the text, it would almost be more beneficial in my mind just to do a completely different translation like the NIV did. But yeah, that, Dr. Hill, that's an important point there, is that we're not correcting errors, although there may be an error in a, say, first edition translation that need to be corrected, typos and different things like that. And also there's textual discoveries that give us new information that we didn't have before, that gives us more clarity on what certain words mean. But yeah, that's important.
Another thing, Tim, the person that headed up the New King James Version on the Hebrew side was Dr. James Price. And he's been an advisor to us and a helper to us for 20 years. And he's now 100 years old.
Wow.
And he applauds when people watch the contextual flow. And if there is a tweaking that's not so much from error to right, but modification for improvement in communication, that's to be applauded. So I hope every translation has modifications for their entire history going forward.
The reason for me that I struggle with translation updates, just being kind of raw and honest with you all, and that is more than anything is everyone having the same edition. Sometimes it can bring a little bit of confusion when someone has, for example, the ESV. Since I brought it up and you all didn't, the ESV, I think there's a 2011, the 2016, and there's a 2025, and I believe there was even a 2001. There's been several updates, and many of them are still floating around because people keep their Bibles for years. And sometimes those little changes to a novice can bring a little bit of confusion. But to your point, Tim Wildsmith's going to eat this up if he sees this video. But to your point, yeah, if you, and Tim Frisch as well is going to eat this up if he sees this video. Textual updates are generally necessary. King James is kind of a weird exception. That thing has just stood the test of time, and people read it. And but these other translations, if they don't update, they are going to fade.
Yeah, good point.
As much as I hate to admit it, you know, textual updates are a bit of a necessary thing. I think that sometimes they're done a little too often, and
they're so minor in the big picture.
Right.
We're talking minuscule.
Yeah. Right. And I don't think that even people like myself sometimes are able to see how minor they are, because the only thing that we say is the translation that I love, that I've been reading for so many years, is going through another update. And I do like stability in a text, but I also understand proper scholarship and being responsible with the text to keep it up to date in a way that we're not fixing necessarily errors or problems, but we're just updating the language for a modern reader. And I think that's the heart behind the BSB, really, is for the modern reader to be able to understand a translation that has been translated faithfully and understandably.
So if you spell stability with a super capital S underlined, you end up with rigidity.
I'm gonna let that pause be there on purpose. Yeah, and I get it, but I'm sure that anyone in scholarship can understand how the average everyday person is going to wrestle with it a little bit. And I am very thankful for the New King James and that stable text and the rigidity. But I'm also thankful to have a really nice companion with the Berean Standard Bible that is committed to those updates. And, you know, if the New King James were to ever update, then I would just preach from the 1984. I'd just be the rebel that would just stick with it. And I don't have trouble. But I do think that we do it too often, and it just creates this sense of instability in a lot of people's minds. And people are going to see that differently. But, you know, that's kind of my standpoint is, if it were me, if Tim ruled the world, which would probably be a terrible world, but if Tim ruled the world, translations would update about every 50 years, which would mean ultimately you're just getting a new translation at that point. So there's really two schools of thought. It's update and tinker with it every so many years and keep it relevant, keep it in front of people, or never update it, it falls out of relevance, and then you're just launching a new translation and hoping that it works. So yeah, I probably need to tweak my position there.
Well, you're very articulate. Well said.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was an amazing segment where we talked about the translation update to the BSB, why it was necessary, why it was so seemingly extensive, but really not that extensive when you consider the over 1,100 chapters in the Bible, and the changes largely being punctuation and a word here or there, nothing really structurally damaging to the sentences and the paragraphs. I read through some of the update and it didn't seem super jarring to me. So I am very thankful. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for this segment. This is definitely more than a nickel's worth. Keep calm, Jesus on.